And although he saw other kings constantly agitating the earth by their strong military movements, carried out under the dictation of the three kinds of false pride. So a lot of very important instructions. As I mentioned, I was actually, for some reason, I thought it was 42. I came and looked at the board last night, I said 42, I thought, oh God, that's tomorrow's verse, but I was wrong. But we see there's many powerful instructions here, as we see with the previous verse in 42, how Vidura, because he knows of Krishna's greatness, he wasn't bewildered by Krishna's acts. Yet we see there's some interesting verses earlier on in the Bhagavatam in the first canto. Kunti, she prays, I think it's in the 18th verse of the 8th chapter, where she says, Maya Javanika Chanam, that it's just like this deluding curtain covers the vision of the materialists, and they don't actually understand who you are. So it's just this Maya Javanika Chanam, this curtain, talks about a curtain. And then Prabhupada gives the analogy of just like, because he had an experience when he was a child, that he was in a play and he was playing Advaita Acharya. And no one in the audience, they were so well rehearsed at this play, no one in the audience actually knew who was who. I mean, meaning who their children were dressed up in the play. They couldn't figure it out. And they played the play so well, they played the part so well, that the audience were moved to tears. It was a play of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. But the point Prabhupada makes in the purport, he doesn't talk about that play, but he talks about how an actor, when they're dressed to play a part in a play, or in this day and age in a movie, that the audience doesn't understand, because they're so expert, and because of their makeup, etc. They don't understand. So Krishna's just like that. He's like an actor who's acting, but no one understands. No one understands how he's carrying these things out, or even why he does the things he does. And then in the next verse, Kunti, she talks about how even, she says, but like no one's understanding. What to speak of us women? Because she's saying, well, I'm a woman, and I'm less intelligent, things like that. But we can't understand. So what to speak of? No one can understand. So what to speak of us? And then we see that in the next chapter, which is the passing of Bhishma Dev, he's lying on the battlefield, and then Yudhisthira comes to him. And Krishna actually inspires Yudhisthira to come to to come to Bhishma and ask him questions. And Bhishma again repeats the same point, that no one can understand you. No one can understand your, because he was reflecting on how, and this is one of the things that really made an impression upon Bhishma, if you like, that Krishna was playing just like an ordinary person. He does this, and this point is made here in Prabhupada's purport from yesterday, that how he acted in a way that further bewildered the Kauravas. He could have acted in a way that helped them to understand he was God, but he didn't. He acted in a way that they became further and further bewildered by the material nature, because they're atheistic. Why would he want them? Just like we see in what's that verse in the Gita? Later on in the Gita, I can't remember the verse, but Krishna says that there's another, there's Avajanati Mamudhari, says fools deride me or descend in the human form, but he also talks about how the atheistic persons, that they'll never understand me, and they're pushed down lower and lower and lower in the modes of nature. Similar verse is there in the Bhagavatam, where it says, Matine Krishna Paratosvatova Mito Videti Grihavartana Madantago Vishatam Mishram Puna Punas Chavita Chavita. And it says Matine Krishna. Paratosvatova. He says they'll never understand Krishna. Not by their own endeavors, by the help of others, or by a combination of both. They'll never understand Krishna. Krishna is only understood in one way. And this is really clearly pointed out in the Gita, where it says, Bhakti mama vijananti yavanyaschasti vitattvataha. That only by devotion can I be understood. And Krishna says this a number of times in the Gita. It's not just once he says this. He says it a number of times in the Gita. That only through devotion will we actually understand him. Was that Bhakti tvananyana shakya aham evam Arjuna jatvam chatatvena pravistam cha parantapa. Again, same point. Only by devotion can he be understood. Only can you understand. Only by devotion can you understand me as I'm standing before you now. He makes the point to Arjuna. So we see that Kunti and Bhishma, they're saying that we're bewildered by your actions, because Bhishma, that's what I was saying, he was reflecting on how Krishna on the battle of Kurukshetra is acting just like an ordinary person, and even to keep Bhishma's promise, but to break his own promise, Krishna picks up a chariot wheel, to protect Arjuna, and he's running at Bhishma, and he's going to attack and kill Bhishma. And because Arjuna was reluctant to do it, because he's his grandfather. It was a very challenging time for Arjuna. Many, many great persons on the other side. And he's reluctant to do it because he's so attached to Bhishma. And so Krishna's thinking, okay, I'll do it. He wasn't bothered. And then Bhishma's looking at this vision of Krishna running towards him, and he's seeing Krishna on the chariot, and how Krishna, he's got dust on his hair that's raised by the chariot wheels and things like that, and the elephants and horses and that stomping all over the place, and the men, and all the dust is raising up, and then he's got beads of sweat on his brow from the hard work of driving the chariot and things like that, and then he sees how Krishna's body is producing blood, out of pastime he's producing blood, and it's because of the arrows of Bhishma. And then he picks up the chariot and he's running at Bhishma, and then even his wrapper falls, his chadar falls off and comes off and falls on the ground. And Bhishma's just looking at this, wondering, and he's thinking, this is so amazing. This is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's acting like this, just like an ordinary person. And of course we know that Krishna didn't have to do any of this. He could have easily just vanquished the whole Kshatriya dynasty in a moment, just with some act of nature, as we're seeing now, with this pandemic. I saw a statistic yesterday. They're saying that in the USA alone, almost half a million people have died. I think 500,000, which is more than the First World War, the Second World War, and the Vietnam War combined. Just in this one act. See how Krishna's nature, how powerful Krishna's nature is. It can wipe out so many persons. Now, some may say they're demons, some may not. I'm not going to get into that discussion. But we can see that just like this, by this act of nature, so many people are wiped out. They have a tsunami or an earthquake. Even like in India just recently, there was that landslide that knocked out a dam. They build these big dams, this mighty work of engineering. And they're so proud of it. And just one act of nature, all this snow and ice and earth just flows down into the lake behind the dam, and causes this big surge and just destroys the dam completely. They even had it on video. Just completely destroys the dam. In a moment. We're thinking in this material world that what we've accomplished is so amazing, it's so strong, it's so powerful, and it's going to stay forever. And we think like that about ourselves. We build up these empires, these big empires or little empires, whatever they are. We have our house or our apartment or our room in the Brahmachari ashram. We've got our cupboard, and we think it's going to stay there forever. Isn't it? And in a moment, gone. In a moment, just by one sort of act of the material nature, or by one, just like there was a plane taking off from some airport in the USA yesterday, and the engine blew up and caught fire. and there was bits sort of coming off the engine, you know, like, and there's one guy, he's sitting in his house and he heard this almighty bang. He said it sounded like, you know, like a cannon or something, which was probably the engine. And then he heard something bang on the roof, and then on the front, in the front yard. And he goes outside, and you know the cowl, the round part at the front of the engine, sitting in his front yard. You know, but it's just like at any given moment we could be sitting here, like in New Govardhan, we're under the flight path from Gold Coast Airport. You know, and an engine could drop off the plane and come through the roof of the temple and kill us all. It's just like that, you know, it's just in a moment. Yet the materialists are so attached. They're thinking that, you know, by my power, by my arrangement, you know, they're so, you know, caught up in this whole sort of notion of how they're creating and sustaining, and we see here the way that Krishna is described in this verse. Actually, I should read the purport, but it's really kind of interesting. The way that Vidura, because he's questioning Uddhava, which is kind of interesting because when Vidura, we go back to the earlier verse, I think about verse 16, Vidura, he just walked out. He said, I'm not taking this, you know, because he was telling Dhritarashtra, it's like, you know, you're maintaining an offense personified. I mean, can you imagine speaking? You go to your brother and speak to him about their child like that. You're maintaining an offense personified. They're really strong words. You know, they didn't use swear words and things like that. They would say, you know, pretty strong things. So he's saying that to his brother, and his brother didn't listen. So obviously we can understand the nature of Duryodhana. Duryodhana is a pretty rotten person. That his uncle is going to call him an offense personified, and that's because of the way he acted towards Krishna. You know, he tried to, you know, inflict misery upon Krishna's very dear devotees. He tried to have Draupadi, you know, like such a thing. He arranged this gambling match because he knew the nature of Yudhisthira, how he was very pious. So he arranges this gambling match. And had his uncle Shakuni, who was playing with loaded dice. You know, Shakuni was an expert cheat, and he knew how to get the dice to come up with whatever he wanted them to. He just knew the art of throwing the dice, so whatever number he wanted, that would come up. You know? And so he just stripped the Pandavas of everything they had, including their wife. You know? And then so they're sending them out, and then it's kind of interesting because I can't remember the exact dynamic of it, but then you know, because Bhishma and Kripa and Drona and Vidura were very disturbed about this gambling match, and Dhritarashtra, you know, he was loving it. You know, he was hanging on every throw of the dice. What have I won now? What have I won now? You know. He was just like, he was gloating. And then there was something said about, you know, how they've been dealt with unfairly. And he said, okay, call them back for one more spin of the dice. And the wage was, okay, everything you've lost you can get back on one throw of the dice. But if you lose, you have to go into exile for 13 years. 12 years just in ordinary exile, last year incognito. And because of Yudhisthira's piety, he knew that it was a Kshatriya's duty to accept the challenge. And they knew that. They knew he was pious. They knew he wouldn't say no, even though the gambling match was rigged, and even though Yudhisthira was a useless gambler. He didn't know how to play dice, but he just accepted because it was his duty, and that was his nature. He was a very, very dutiful person, even though it meant that he'd lose everything. And he knew he'd lose everything. But, you know, he probably didn't realize how impious the Kauravas were and how they were willing to humiliate them to such an extent. But I guess he should have known that because of the things that happened in the past, you know, how they tried to burn them in the house of Lakavara and Avatar, how they tried to poison, or how they did poison Bhishma. So many different, you know, irreligious things they did. just to push down the Pandavas, and so they could, because Yudhisthira was the rightful king. And as I mentioned the other day, they were told that when the sages brought the 5 children from the forest back to the kingdom after Pandu died, they told him that he is the rightful heir for the throne, and you must now take care of him and train him to rule. But Dhritarashtra didn't want that. Dhritarashtra wanted that he stays the emperor and that his sons rule. It's a fantastic story, and see what's happening is here is that after leaving the palace, and it describes in verse 16 how he just walked out and he wasn't bothered. He was just like, no, I'm out of here. I've had this, and he just put his bow aside and just left. And the whole time he was fixed on Krishna. There wasn't a point where he didn't see Krishna. And the Acharyas described that one of the reasons he saw Krishna all the time is because Krishna was wherever he went, Krishna went there first. Obviously in another manifestation, but in another form, but he went there first. And so wherever he went, he was seeing Krishna. But at some point he stopped seeing Krishna, and then he was immersed in this lamentation of separation. And then when he came upon Uddhava, this gave him this opportunity to gain, because he was traveling incognito, which does it mention here in this verse or the previous verse? I can't remember. Yeah, without being seen by others. There's drishta, I think it mentions in the verse. Yeah, vidam bena drisho nrinam. So vidam bena means without being recognized. He was not recognized by the, and drishta means seeing, and nrinam means men or other people. So he traveled around without being seen. So no one actually knew that who he was. But then when he came upon Uddhava, so he wasn't talking to people. He was just being very keeping to himself. He wasn't talking about Krishna or anything like that. But he was visiting places of pilgrimage. But when he saw Uddhava, and he knew that all the Kauravas had been, the Yadus had departed and things like that, and he knew that Krishna and Balaram had also left. And so it's interesting the way, like if you look at the whole story of this chapter, you can see how Vidura approaches Uddhava, and it's quite similar to the way that when Arjuna, when he returned from Dwarka after Krishna had departed, and the way that Yudhisthira was asking questions of Arjuna. He doesn't come out right out. He knew that something big had happened. He knew it's like that probably Krishna's departed. But he didn't want to come out right out and say it because it was just too disturbing. So he was asking, how are the Yadus, are they faring well? How is Ugrasena? How is this one? How is that one? He was asking all about that, and then he says, well, I can see how distressed you are. Is this because And he's like gently leading up to the discussion. So here we see also Vidura already knew that all these personalities had departed. He knew the history because he heard about it when he was traveling. But he was kind of leading up to the point where he wanted Uddhava to recount the pastimes of Krishna, which is what we see happens in the next 2 chapters. In the next chapter, we'll see that Uddhava recounts Krishna's Vrindavan pastimes. The whole thing, up to the point where he was in the rasa dance with the gopis. And then in the 3rd chapter of this canto, he talks about Krishna's pastimes outside of Vrindavan. Because he's immersed in this separation, he knows the only way that he can be absorbed in association, or be actually in Krishna's association, is through hearing about the pastimes of Krishna. There's what's that verse? Vasudeva Kataruchi. There's Mahatsevam Dwaram Baho Vimuktas. By associating or serving great souls, great service is done. And there's this Vasudeva Kataruchi. So by hearing the pastimes of Vasudeva, one derives great taste, satisfaction. Or there's that verse in the Gita where it mentions about I haven't been started remembering or reciting verses enough, I don't think. Huh? Where it talks about what was it? Ananya Chintiyasmi, no, what was it? Always chanting my glories, endeavoring great determination, bowing down before me. Yoga Chema, no, that's different. But he talks about the great souls, how the great souls are always immersed in they derive great satisfaction and bliss by always enlightening another one and conversing about me. So we see, we see Viduras like that. Was it Mahatmanastu Mangparta? Is that the verse? Sakta, thank you. Sattam Kityantam Mam, yeah, okay. So, but they're deriving great satisfaction and bliss. And that's what's happening here. Vidura he's asking Uddhava about the Kauravas. What's happening here? Where's this one? Where's that one? What about Krishna? What about Balaram? What about Yudhisthira? What about the Pandavas? What about Kunti? What about Ugrasena? And he didn't ask about Dhritarashtra. He didn't want to know about Dhritarashtra. He was quite disappointed with Dhritarashtra. And he knew that nothing good could happen to Dhritarashtra because he was impious. And even though he had softness in his heart for Dhritarashtra, but he knew because he was so impious, because he was denying Krishna, that and persecuting Krishna's devotees, that nothing good would happen to him. He would come to no good, as they say. But the reason he was asking all these questions is because he wanted to hear about the pastimes, so he could associate with Krishna. And so it's very quite an amazing story. As declared in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord appears in this mortal world to execute his much-needed mission of killing the miscreants and giving protection to the suffering faithful. What verse is that? Vinashchaya Tuduskritam, Dharma Samstapana Sambrahmi. In spite of that mission, Lord Krishna tolerated the insult to Draupadi by the Kurus and the injustices perpetrated against the Pandavas, as well as insults to himself. And what was the insult to himself? Or one of the insults to himself? Do you know the story? Before the Kurukshetra war started, he went to Hastinapur as a messenger to try to convince them not to fight and just give them some villages. Huh? 5 villages, yeah. And what did Duryodhana say? I won't even give you enough land into which you could drive the point of a pin. So mean-spirited. Yeah? He just wanted, he wanted to exterminate the Pandavas with a vengeance. He really had this nasty spirit towards the Pandavas. Yet, and then he tried to, because he figured, without Krishna, the Pandavas will perish. They can't survive without Krishna, so we're going to capture Krishna. And then, so they arranged, there was this pit just opened up, the floor opened up, and he was supposed to drop in the pit. And then Krishna manifested a partial universal form. And what did Duryodhana think? It's just some magic. It's some trick. He was just completely irreverent attitude towards Krishna. Everyone else, Bhishma is saying he's the Supreme Personality of God, he's offering prayers, and we see in the 9th chapter of the first canto how, that he's glorifying him as the Supreme Personality of God, and he's saying that all the kings understood you, the Supreme Lord. Duryodhana stubbornly refused to accept it because he's an atheist. He's just demoniac. And Drona knew that he was Krishna. Kripakara knew he was Krishna. Even Karna knew he was Krishna. But Karna was blinded by his friendship. And kind of, at least intellectually, Dhritarashtra accepted he was Krishna. But he wasn't willing to surrender. Because why? Because he was blinded by material desires. Therefore he couldn't surrender to Krishna. So it just goes to show that even knowledge is not enough. There has to be more to it than knowledge. Just knowing that Krishna is God is not enough. You actually have to surrender. You actually have to practice the process of bhakti. The question may be raised, why did he tolerate such injustices and insults in his presence? And Prabhupada will answer this in the purport. He answers it very wonderfully. Why did he not chastise the Kurus immediately when Draupadi was insulted in the assembly by the Kurus by their attempt to see her naked in the presence of all? And Prabhupada talks about this Asat Sabhaya. He talks about the vicious assembly. So many commentators translate that in different ways, but both Prabhupada and Jiva Goswami refer to Asat Sabhaya as when Draupadi was being stripped naked. Because this was, like the gambling match was one thing, that was okay, that was pretty bad. But to drag in a chaste woman into such an assembly and to strip her naked was considered to be the greatest degradation of the Kshatriyas. It was such a vicious thing to do. Never been done before. It was just so degraded. And you can see how the material nature was deluding them into thinking that this was okay. And it's kind of interesting because even though this was going on, Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, Dhritarashtra, they did nothing. It's really interesting how they did nothing. When Draupadi, so I read that. When Draupadi was insulted in the assembly by the Kurus by their attempt to see her naked in the presence of all, the Lord protected Draupadi by supplying an unlimited length of clothing, but he did not chastise the insulting party immediately. This silence of the Lord did not mean, however, that he excused the offences of the Kurus. There were many other kings on earth who had become very proud of the three kinds of possessions. Or as we see here in the verse, it's saying the three kinds of false pride. So what are those false prides? We see here it's being described. Wealth, education, and followers. And we see, like there's so many people in this world are puffed up. They think they're very wealthy, so there's nothing they can't do. There's nothing, and they do all sorts of, some of these wealthy people, they do all sorts of degraded things just because they have so much money they think they can do anything. But the material nature catches up with them all. Wealth, education, some people are very, very educated. They think that there's no one smarter than them. And followers, they think they're very powerful because so many people follow them. And they were constantly agitating the earth by movements of military strength. The Lord was just waiting to get them together on the battle of Kurukshetra and kill them all at one time, just to make a shortcut in his killing mission. So you see Krishna's arrangement. He's like, there's all these, like Krishna was killing some people because he wanted to enjoy the sport. But it got to the point where, okay, time to finish this all up. And millions upon millions on both sides. And he tells Arjuna in the 11th chapter of the Gita that actually out of all these kings and warriors on both sides, only you, the Pandavas, will survive. A few others, but they were also killed at the end. And practically speaking, Kritavarma, Ashvatthama, and Kripacharya, Kripacharya was the only person who survived. And Ashvatthama was almost killed later. He had his top knot cut off, so that was interesting also. But he tells them in the Gita, you're the only ones who are going to survive. Everyone else is going to be killed. Because that was Krishna's plan. Because they had become puffed up by these three kinds of false pride. Wealth, education, followers, strength, fame, whatever, They'd become puffed up by these things. Therefore, they needed to be removed. Because as we see earlier on, it's described in the Mahabharata how the earth she went to the Lord and was approaching how she become burdened by all these powerful warriors. And Prabhupada talks here about how you could constantly hear the chariots rattling over the earth as they're moving their military might over the earth. This is disturbing to the earth. It's not meant to be engaged in this kind of military activity all the time. This is disturbing. So she went to the Lord and prayed to the Lord, and he agreed to come and relieve the burden of the earth by removing all these Kshatriyas. And it's interesting the way Prabhupada says, just to make a shortcut in his killing mission. One time, kill them all. Yeah? Godless kings or heads of state, when puffed up by advancement of material wealth, education, and increase of population, always make a show of military strength and give trouble to the innocent. They always do it. When Lord Krishna was personally present, there were many such kings all over the world, and he thus arranged for the battle of Kurukshetra. In his manifestation of Vishvarupa, the Lord expressed his mission of killing as follows. And this is, like I said, this is from the 11th chapter. I have willingly descended on the earth in my capacity of inexorable time in order to decrease the unwanted population. I shall finish all those who have assembled here, except you, the Pandavas. This killing does not wait for you to take part in it. It is already arranged. All will be killed by me. If you want to become famous as the hero of the battlefield and thus enjoy the booty of war, then, O Savyasachin, just become the immediate cause of this killing and thus take the credit. I have already killed all the great warriors, Bhishma, Drona, Jayadratha, Karna, and many other great generals. Do not worry. Fight the battle and be famous as a great hero. And that's Bhagavad Gita 11:32-34. So we see, Krishna is telling Arjuna when he manifests the universal form, and what he's seeing is like he's seeing all these warriors and everyone on Kurukshetra, even all the worlds, they're just entering into Krishna's mouth, and the warriors are entering into Krishna's mouth and they're getting smashed on his teeth and getting stuck between, like when you eat corn and you get stuff stuck between your teeth. So he had warriors stuck between his teeth, and bits and pieces and stuff like that, and then Arjuna's just like, he's just like, awestruck. He's like dumbfounded. He's saying, "Who are you?" He just couldn't believe what was happening. He's like, "Who are you?" And then so Krishna explains, "Just time I am, the great destroyer of the worlds, and except you, the Pandavas, all those who are assembled here on this battlefield will be destroyed by me." Arjuna was just like, there's an English expression. He was gobsmacked. He just didn't know, what was going on, and who is this person? Because he had been quite familiar in his approach to Krishna up until that point, because I've addressed you Osaka, Hey Saketi, Hey Yadava, and it's interesting the Acharyas explain because he's addressing him as Yadava. There's a significance behind that, because Arjuna was a Kaurava. The Kauravas were the emperors. The Yadavas were a lesser race. They were a lesser Kshatriya family. So that he's addressing Krishna as a Yadava, in one sense he's saying, you're inferior to me. But then when he sees the universal form, he's kind of retracting all that. He's like, uh-oh, what have I done here, I've been so familiar. You are, and he always knew that he was the Supreme Person, I've got it, but when he saw the universal form, it's kind of like, when you have this realization, it kind of hits you like a brick. Oh, you understand something, or you really understand what it is? That's what happened to him. He understood who it was who was sitting on the chariot in front of him. It wasn't just, okay, he's my friend, but he's much, much more than that. He's God. And so Krishna is saying that, I've killed them all. You just be an instrument in the fight. You take the credit for the fight. And this last short paragraph, this last finishing paragraph, is quite an amazing statement. Prabhupada, the way Prabhupada sort of sums up these points sometimes is just astounding, and it's just so succinct, and he uses just the perfect statements to get the point across really well. The Lord always wants to see his devotee as the hero of some episode which he himself performs. So we see Krishna saying, I've killed them all, and he's showing them. He's showing them how they're all smashed in between his teeth and stuck between his teeth, and millions upon millions of warriors. Krishna's killed them all. But he wants Arjuna to get the credit for it. Yeah? The Lord always wants to see his devotee as the hero of some episode which he himself performs. He wanted to see his devotee and friend Arjuna as the hero of the battle of Kurukshetra, and thus he waited for all the miscreants of the world to assemble. That and nothing else is the explanation of his waiting. Amazing, isn't it, the way Prabhupada summed it all up? This is the only reason he did it. He could have made so many arrangements to kill all these people. And if we look at if we look at, say for instance, the way the Gita is spoken, for instance, right? This whole putting Arjuna into ignorance, right? Why? Why would, Arjuna is Krishna's eternal associate. Arjuna is always adventing with the Lord, which we see that's described in the beginning of the 4th chapter, where Krishna says to Arjuna, many, many births both you and I have taken together. I can remember all of them, you cannot. So he's saying he's Krishna's eternal associate. So if he's Krishna's eternal associate, where is the question of him being in Maya? Where is the question of him not understanding the absolute truth? But for the purpose of speaking Bhagavad Gita, Krishna arranges for him to be forgetful of the truth. And we see the similar thing with the Bhagavatam. This whole arrangement with you look at the first 18 chapters. There's 19 chapters in the first canto. You look at the first 18 chapters. This whole scenario evolves simply for this point of Sukadeva Goswami's appearance in the 19th chapter. You look at the whole continuity, the storyline of all those chapters, and you can see it just is to get us to this point of Sukadeva Goswami appearing. So Krishna's made this whole arrangement. And why does Sukadeva Goswami appear? Sukadeva Goswami appears to speak the Bhagavatam. So Krishna's made this whole arrangement to get to the point, with Bhishma's passing and Ashwatthama and Kunti and all these different things. This whole scenario is unfolded just to get to the point where the Bhagavatam is advented. Why? For our benefit. Same with the Gita, for our benefit. Arjuna didn't need the Gita. Arjuna didn't need to hear the Gita. Why? Because he's Krishna's eternal associate. Where's the question of an eternal associate of the Lord needing to hear philosophy like Bhagavad Gita? Because the eternal associates of the Lord are Nityasiddha. They're eternally liberated. Eternally liberated person understands the absolute truth. But for Krishna's pastime, this happens. So we see the same here. Krishna's performing this whole Leela. And like the whole, like Bhishma, like why with Yudhisthira, why isn't it that Vyasadeva could not convince Yudhisthira it was his, that this is all the arrangement of the Lord, that all these millions upon millions, I think, there's different estimates of how many millions of people were killed. Prabhupada in one place says 64 million people were killed at this battle. Why couldn't Vyasadeva convince him that this was the arrangement of the Lord, that all these people were killed? So many sages tried to convince Yudhisthira. He just couldn't. He couldn't buy it. He just wasn't. He was just immersed in lamentation. He wanted to give up his body, and he wasn't prepared to rule the kingdom. Krishna himself tried to convince Yudhisthira. The Supreme Personality of Godhead himself could not convince Yudhisthira. Does that mean that Krishna is not a very good preacher? Why couldn't he convince Yudhisthira that it was his duty to rule the kingdom? He wanted to glorify his devotee, exactly. So the same thing we see here. And there's so many pastimes like that, where Krishna enacted things just for the sake of glorifying his devotee. So many times he does that. And so the same thing here is he brought all these persons together in one place, these millions upon millions of warriors, which he could have easily have killed himself, just like we see with Shishupal. He tolerated 99 offenses. Shishupal blasphemed Krishna 99 times. 100th time, off with his head. Just like that, in a flash. And we see, like with Jarasandha, similar kind of thing. Right? He fought with Jarasandha how many times? 18 times. 18 times. Why? Why did he do that? Because he's bringing all those warriors there to kill them all. Rather than going, all over the place, killing this one, killing that one. He brings them all there at one time and kills them. Then he goes and gets another army. He kills them again. Then he gets another army. He kills them again. And then finally, I think at the same time, the kingdom was attacked by Kalyayavana. And then Krishna wouldn't even look at Kalyayavana. And he ran off, and he came into a cave, and there was Muchukunda was sleeping there, and then Kalyayavana thought it was Krishna sleeping, lying down, so he kicked him, And Muchukunda woke up, and he just, with his Shakti from his eyes, he just burnt him to ashes. So Krishna wouldn't even... So you can see, one of the definitions that's given in Nectar Devotion of expert, and Krishna is very, very expert, is with one act he can achieve many different things. So here with the Balakurukshetra, like with Kaliyavana, Muchukunda, Jarasandha, the whole thing, So here we see with the Balakurukshetra, he achieved many, many things in one act. He glorified Arjuna. He glorified the Pandavas. He eliminated all these puffed up warriors in a very simple act. And in most cases, he didn't even have to kill anyone. It was all done by others. And also, it's mentioned that all those who died on the Balakurukshetra, seeing Krishna or before Krishna, they achieved liberation. So many, many things were done. And also he glorified Bhishma in the Balakurukshetra. He glorified Bhishma, who was also his great devotee. And as I was mentioned before, we see because Bhishma was experiencing prema. He was on such a high level, he was experiencing prema. But still he's saying, I can't understand why you do these things. Kunti was experiencing prema. Not the same prema as the gopis, there's different levels of prema. Kunti was saying, I can't understand. You have this deluding potency, and the whole world's deluded by your deluding potency. I can't understand. Yet Vidura, also experiencing prema, different level of prema. But he's saying, I can understand. I'm not bewildered by this. Of course, he doesn't know, it's not possible to know Krishna. In truth, or in truth you can know him, but not every detail of Krishna. You can't know every detail of Krishna, but why? Because he's unlimited. But you can understand the truth of Krishna. What's that? That's that verse in the Gita, where Krishna says to Arjuna, one who understands the Janma Karma Chame Divyam Evam Yoviti Tatpata Shaktite Hampuna Jama Nayati Mameti Sojan. He says, one who understands the transcendental nature of my appearance, my activities, in truth, is Tatpataha. And he says, will not Punna Jama Navidyata. You don't take birth again. So we see here that Vidura, he's understood the truth about Krishna. Therefore he's not bewildered. Therefore he has no doubt. And that when he was driven from the palace by the insults of Duryodhana, he wasn't perplexed. He wasn't, he was upset, but he knew that this was all the action of the Lord, and so therefore he just went wherever he went. He was just absorbed in thought of the Lord. So this is the actions of a great soul, but it's also there, not just to glorify great souls, but also to give us guidance, instruction on where to focus, where we need to fix our attention, if you like, in order that we can become also freed from the thoughts of trying to manipulate or trying to enjoy this material nature, and actually understand our only business here is to serve Krishna. So it's very, very extraordinary pastime, very, very amazing pastime actually. But I really like the way that Prabhupada concludes this. He says that and nothing else is the explanation of his waiting. Krishna was waiting. He could have killed them all in a moment, just with a blink of his eyelid. Just like with the thought process, he creates the whole material universe. So with the thought process, he can destroy the whole material universe, just like that. It doesn't take. It's not like a big effort for him. It's like say for instance we want to knock down this building. Take a lot of effort, especially if you're doing it with a sledgehammer or something like that. A lot of effort. Take you days and days and days to do it too. But Krishna, in a moment, can destroy the whole material universe. But just to glorify his devotee, he brought all those millions of warriors there in one place and killed them. Nothing else. That and nothing else is the explanation of his waiting. It's a really nice statement. Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments? corrections? Prabhu? Thank you for the opportunity to speak about Krishna. I mean, I don't recall hearing any commentary saying that they're chanting Bhagavatam and Gita. They may be, I don't know. But it just means they're always talking about Krishna. You know, just like we see in Vrindavan. The cowherd girls and the cowherd boys are all, oh, Krishna did this. Did you hear Krishna did that? Did you hear how Krishna... They're just so infatuated with Krishna. It's like, you know, like you see in this world, like sometimes like a boy and girl, you know, they're infatuated with each other. They're just always thinking about each other, talking about each other. A little bit like that, but sort of so much more. And so they're so infatuated with Krishna that every moment of every day, they're just completely absorbed in Krishna. And they just want to hear more about him. They want to speak more about him. They want to be with him. They want to, you know, their whole life is just focused around Krishna. It's like you look at Mother Yasoda, you know, she's churning butter, right? She, you know, like she'll ask Nanda Maharaj, she'll talk to Nanda Maharaj. It's like, you know, I've heard that on you know, on this side of Govardhan there's a particular flavour of some grass growing there. Can you go there today and have the cows eat that grass, so that the flavour comes into the butter and into the milk. So when I make butter, it has that flavour. But why she's thinking that? She's thinking that because she wants to feed the butter to Krishna. So even though she may not mention Krishna directly, her whole motivation is to please Krishna. So in that way, you know, they may not necessarily be directly glorifying Krishna in their words, but because every act they're doing is focused on Krishna, therefore they're completely Krishna conscious. Therefore, you know, it's just like Prabhupada, sometimes he would talk about, like there's one story I can remember, for instance, that Prabhupada was in Calcutta, Tamal Krishna Maharaj and some other devotees there, and he wanted Tamal Krishna Maharaj to go to Mayapur to buy the land. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj at that time had quite some dealings in India, and he knew, and West Bengal, and he knew how difficult it would be to do that. And at the same time, they were hearing reports coming from the USA about the bus parties. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was very enlivened by that, and he wanted to go and be on one of these bus parties and engage in Sankirtan. And so he said to Prabhupada that, Prabhupada, I'd much rather go and do Sankirtan than go and do all this business. And Srila Prabhupada said, that is also Sankirtan, because it's connected with Krishna. So the thing is that like, when they say that, you know, the denizens of the spiritual world are always engaged in chanting the glories of Krishna, they may not necessarily be directly vibrating words of Krishna, because everything they're doing is connected with Krishna. There's no difference, because in the absolute realm everything is absolute because of its connection to Krishna. As long as something's connected to Krishna, it's transcendental. As soon as it loses that connection with Krishna, same for us, as soon as we forget our connection with Krishna, we can become covered by material energy. So the spiritual world, everything is connected to Krishna. Nothing is disconnected from Krishna. Therefore, that description is there. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much, Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki, Jai Nitai Goprendrandi.